£30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
On the day that I got the money in the bank account, everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GBNews.
Amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Okwir, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Riots in Southport last night. Many police officers injured. All of this following the horrendous murder of those 3 young girls. And in particular, a massive pile-on sponsored by the BBC on me for daring to ask who the attacker was and whether he was someone the authorities were interested in. We'll debate all of that tonight. And I shall say, is it fair and reasonable to ask questions, or should we simply shut up and go home? Also last night in Southend, a machete attack. People on the streets fighting with machetes. Is this part of the societal decline that I was talking about in the general election? And finally, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, comes clean. She will put taxes up on the 30th of October in the budget. All of that and much more in just a moment. First, let's get the news.
Good evening. The top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that police say they're aware of plans for further unrest for Southport tonight in reaction to false claims swirling on social media that a Muslim had killed 3 local girls. Disorder broke out yesterday evening outside a mosque following speculation about the 17-year-old suspect who's now in police custody. Officers have now been given more time to question him. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police have placed conditions on a protest outside Downing Street tonight in response to those stabbings. The Enough is Enough demonstration, they say, must end at 8:30 this evening. Well, also in the news today, the BBC has admitted they knew about the arrest of the former newsreader Hugh Edwards 5 months before he resigned in April. But the corporation says it would only have sacked him if he'd been charged while being a member of staff. Earlier on, the Metropolitan Police confirmed that the man who sent the former presenter indecent images of children was a convicted paedophile. Mr Edwards had 41 of the most serious type of photographs in his WhatsApp messages chat, including one of a child as young as 7 years old. Angela Rayner is playing down suggestions of a backlash against the government's house building drive as she launches a new Towns Task Force. The Deputy Prime Minister says restoring mandatory housing targets for local authorities is a key part of the government's plan to ease a shortage of housing. But there are also plans to drop the previous government's requirement for those new homes to be beautiful, with Labour arguing that is a subjective judgment. Now, a homeless man who pushed a stranger onto the tracks at a London tube station was found guilty today of attempted murder. Kurdish migrant Berwa Sorsh, who's 24, shoved Tadeusz Potachok off the platform at Oxford Circus in central London. He narrowly missed touching the live rail and was quickly helped back onto the platform by another passenger just before the train arrived in the station. The driver of that oncoming train saying if he'd been on the tracks just a few seconds more, he would have been killed. Turning now to news in the Middle East, where both Foreign and Defence Secretaries are on a visit, as Benjamin Netanyahu's vowed tonight to continue in his war against Hamas. The Israeli Prime Minister praised his military for its strike on the Lebanese capital Beirut, which killed a senior Hezbollah commander. Meanwhile, Iran's promised harsh punishment for the assassination of a Hamas leader on its soil. Ismail Haniyeh died in a strike on the Iranian capital, which the terror group is blaming on Israel, though the Israeli government has refused to comment. Some better news to end this bulletin on, though, for you. A roundup of today's Olympic action sees Team GB landing 2 more golds at the Paris Games, and both coming in quite a dramatic fashion as well. Alex Yee snatching victory in the very closing stages of the men's triathlon. Congratulations to him. While the women's quadruple sculls rowers pipped the Netherlands right at the post to secure their gold. And their sensational comeback puts Britain 4th in the medal table. Those are the latest headlines from GB News for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. As I was on air last night, we were debating just how we should respond to the just truly horrific attack and murder of those 3 young girls up in Southport. I raised a couple of questions. I said, why is it these days, whenever something happens, we're told almost immediately it's a non-terror attack? And I was very struck the week before in Kent that a lieutenant colonel in full uniform is stabbed and nearly killed in the street. It's a non-terror attack. I also asked, in the wake of the murder that we saw that was declared to be terrorism in Hartlepool sometime last year, that it seems whenever these things happen, there is a reluctance to tell us the full truth. And indeed, in the Kent case, the police in Kent were telling all the broadcasters the need to play down the incident. So I asked why what had happened in Southport was a non-terror incident. I also asked whether, amidst a sea of speculation, the 17-year-old involved had been under the watch of our authorities. Well, I was asking some gentle questions that I thought were fair and reasonable. At the same time, the internet was awash with all sorts of theories, all of which proved to be unfounded. But that's what led to the riots last night. That's what led to people being outside that mosque in Southport. You know, sometimes just tell the public the truth and you might actually stop riots from happening. Well, that doesn't matter because it's me. So I listened to the BBC this morning, Radio 4's Today programme, to be greeted by Brendan Cox. Now, Brendan Cox used to work for Save the Children. He's held up to be this paragon of virtue, although the circumstances after claims of all sorts of sexual misconduct under which he left wouldn't necessarily suggest to me that he was a paragon of virtue. But of course, his wife, Jo, had the misfortune to be murdered in what was undoubtedly a terrorist murderer. So he's held up to be somebody who can speak on these things. Here was Brendan Cox on what happened in Southport last night on BBC's Radio 4.
But the willingness of supposedly mainstream politicians, somebody like Nigel Farage, to put out that kind of insinuation, that line of, you know, is the truth being withheld from us? Not do we not know some of the answers to this, which we certainly don't, but is the truth being withheld from us? Is this person being monitored? Some people say they are. It's right out of the Trump playbook. And in my view, it makes Nigel Farage nothing better than a Tommy Robinson in a suit. It is beyond the pale to use a moment like this to spread your narrative and to spread your hatred. And we saw the results on Southport streets last night.
So there we are. There was Brendan Cox, the high priest of virtue. Alongside him, there was a representative of hope, not hate. Yes, you would have thought to listen to these people that I was arm in glove with Tommy Robinson, which I never have been and never ever will be. You would also think I'd been insightful, encouraging people to head to Southport, none of which were true. And interestingly, a lot of Labour MPs attacked me, and I suspect that's because the Labour Party know there is a very deep sense of unease out there in this country as to what is going on. And it's not just what happened in Southport, it's what happened later on that evening in Southend, which I will come to. It's the marches, it's the mob violence, it's the situation in Leeds where the police literally withdraw and allow a riot to continue. And it's also, in many, many cases, a feeling of double standards of policing. But I also spoke today to a Northern Ireland Member of Parliament, somebody of a certain age who'd lived through the Troubles, and he said, well, whenever there was an outrage in Northern Ireland, the first question anybody asked was who was the perpetrator and had we been let down by the security services? I think what I asked was perfectly fair and reasonable. I think if my questions had been answered, that mosque would not have been attacked last night. Let me ask you, is it fair and reasonable to ask questions in circumstances like this? Give me your thoughts. Farage at GBnews.com. Well, joining me down the line, somebody else who joined in the pile-on is former Conservative Member of Parliament for Bournemouth, Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, you and I don't always agree on things. We normally have a degree of mutual respect. Do you understand why I think, had people known the truth, had they known that this was not somebody, as was being said online, who'd crossed the English Channel in a dinghy in October 2023, we might not have had riots on that scale in Southport last night?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me on your show. And let me just perhaps set up my stall, and I'll be grateful to hear your thoughts. I mean, we've spoken many times as on air and indeed off air as well. There's much that we're aligned on, as you suggest, not least UK defence and security. Where we've disagreed, we've done so with respect, without the conversation heading south, as so often political discourse descends these days. And where there's a difference of opinion, it's in that spirit of keeping the bar high. I hope we can have a frank conversation about this, better understand each other's views, that I join you today. On this, I hope you'd agree that we need to begin by recognizing the loss of life here. That's where our first thoughts should be, with the 3 that have been killed and the others that have been injured. But, as you said in your introduction, there's now a wider community suffering, and not just struggling and coming to terms with this horrible attack, but the subsequent orchestrated sickening of violent riots that's taken place, leaving police officers injured, some of them very, very seriously indeed. And it is those false claims, the disinformation, which you quite rightly point out, on the internet, whipping up that frenzy of hate, spreading disinformation, encouraging the English Defence League, who's rallied its supporters with the sole intent of stirring up hate and seeking to divide. And it's this incident which raises so many, if we're going to prevent this from happening in the future, the speed in which fake news went from swirling around online to the violence offline. The failure of Twitter, also, that you should be aware that speculation was going to rise. Why didn't they properly police the platform? And then, this has come to you, sir, the role of influential voices such as yours. And my humble request is to recognize what you say matters. You, sir, have a reach and an influence well beyond most MPs. People listen to you. They form their views by what you say. It's one thing to affect and disrupt mainstream thinking, as you've done very effectively over the last decade or so, or longer, in political matters. But I respectfully ask you to recognize that when it comes to matters of security and indeed terrorism, because that's the word you use, something that's directly affected my life, that those with a public profile do need to be aware of how their words could be taken out of context, especially when it comes relating to terrorism, not least Islamic extremism. That's simply my position, which I hope you would agree or at least understand.
Yeah, I mean, the EDL element of it, I'm sure there were some EDL activists that came in from other parts of the Northwest. Also true to say that most people on those streets last night did actually live in Southport. You know, to listen to the BBC this morning, you'd have thought that everybody had been shipped in from sort of outer space, which clearly wasn't true, and the arrests and the stats do prove that. Tobias, I would argue this. I would come back at you by saying this. Had my questions been answered clearly, we would have ended much of that false, fake news speculation that was going on social media. And, you know, there is a deep sense of unease in this country that something is going wrong. Had we been told a bit more, and I know the guy was 17, and that makes it more complicated, and I do get that, I think it's reasonable that I asked those questions. And I don't believe anything I did in any way was stirring up disorder. In fact, I put it to you, if I'd been answered clearly, the riots would have been smaller.
Well, you touched on something absolutely fundamental to our law. It would have been illegal to actually spell out the circumstances, given that this was a minor, a 17-year-old. Now, maybe that's a question that now needs to be deliberated, but that's for you to take to the Home Affairs Committee or raise in Parliament. My concern is that you are now a political leader. You're in Parliament itself, regardless of party. I hope you'd always put the country's interests first, because has this been good for Britain, what happened last night? It's very easy to play on people's anxieties, on their anger, their frustrations. And there's much to be concerned about. You and I can have a big debate about where our world's going, why we're not doing enough. But Parliament must look for solutions, and parliamentarians must offer the wisdom and the leadership that offers answers. We must do nothing to absolutely inflame the situation. I will agree with you in part about keeping people informed. We had a terrible incident in Bournemouth here, where a couple of people lost their lives because of a freak wave that came through and they drowned. The speculation that came through that it was to do with one of the boats, the big boats that operate in this area, the boat operator lost his job because of it. It had nothing to do with it. But the police were very slow in providing information.
Yeah. No, the truth matters. Yeah, the truth matters. The
speculation to go overboard, it really did. From there, I do absolutely agree with you. I simply plea with you that you must recognise that your comments, particularly on terrorism, that I lost my brother in the Bali bombing, okay? You know that I've been affected by terrorism not once, but a number of times in my life. So when people use that word, and it's right, it's still there. We've got ISIS-K that's going to grow larger than Al-Qaeda. What are we doing about it? These are important questions that you and I can spend a lot of time discussing and debating. But when we tie it up in what's going on in the Southport, until we have the information, you know, this person, I understand, may have been from Rwanda. Rwanda is mostly a Christian, Catholic country. So again, things have got out of control.
No, Tobias, I didn't stir.
My voice can help calm things down.
I didn't stir any of that. I thank you for coming on the programme and having a frank exchange of views. I'm joined by Colin Sutton, retired senior investigating officer at the Met Police, who, of course, famously caught Levay Belfield, that awful man, and the Night Stalker. Colin, I mean, it was a rotten night for the police, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, I'm no politician. I'm just a copper, or was. And, you know, the important things around Southport, the important things, the family who's lost a child, the families that have got people in hospital and are on pins as to whether or not they recover and how quickly.
I know.
And then you've got a group of police officers, they're local police officers, who were the first responders to this and had the worst day of their life going into that scene. And then the very next night, they're back out, they're bravely back out, and people are throwing lumps of masonry at them. You know, and what job would that happen in? But I think the important thing with this is not to play politics with it at all, but I do agree with you that police and the authorities generally need to regain the trust of the population in what they're telling them.
Yeah.
And if it's perceived that there is a half-truth, or not all the truth, or not all the story being told, then perceptions are real, and we end up where we were last night.
Yeah, and we're also, Colin, living in an internet age.
Yeah.
We don't have to wait for the next morning's newspapers to read a variety of opinions. This stuff is instant. I mean, quite a large percentage of what's online is an absolute load of old baloney, as you and I know. Some of this stuff caught fire last night, literally online, with millions. I was being... Friends of mine say, why are you not condemning? Why are you... I said, well, whoa, hang on a second. Let's try and find out the truth. So do the police perhaps need to understand what the tech age really is?
Yeah, I think even from my time, I joined more than 40 years ago, and we, the police, have never been good at getting ahead of the curve in terms of
the narrative,
and in communications. And actually what's happened is with the explosion of the internet, the explosion of social media, that's taken off exponentially, and so they've fallen even further behind. And I think that's the issue. But, there were two issues last night, rightly or wrongly. I don't say whether people should think about these or not, but they did. Was this man an asylum seeker, an immigrant who'd come across on a boat? Was he a Muslim? They were the two questions that were being debated.
They were.
And the police came out and said he was born in Cardiff 17 years ago. Great, that deals with number one. Why not say he was born in Cardiff and he's a Christian?
Or whatever
or he
may
has
be.
no religion. and the issue with that is that when nothing of that is said, then people will make assumptions, and they fill the vacuum of information, and that's what Lindsay said.
Colin, we've had all through our modern history periods of violence on streets and mods and rockers clashing and all sorts of things going on.
Yeah.
But it feels to me, although we are going through a period of societal decline in terms of people's behaviour on the streets.
It's hard to argue with that, and I was fortunate enough to join the Metropolitan Police just before the Brixton riots in 1981, and I lived through those and subsequent ones and poll tax and things like that. And there were tough times then, and there were always tough times, I guess. I think it's sort of a perfect storm, and it goes back to my favourite sort of blame person for this, which is dear old Mrs May, because when we started cutting the ability of police to police, when we started cutting down local police stations, when they got further removed from their communities and when the numbers went down, it made them difficult to do the ordinary nuts and bolts policing. And that has led to a decline in trust and confidence. And police services are trying desperately to bring that back now, but without the tools and the fabric and the ecosystem they need.
It's a common complaint. But I think the big shout-out from Colin Sutton here is that the police forces across this country need to gain control of the narrative. And that's what I get loudly and clearly from you.
They need to tell the truth and be seen to tell the truth so that they're relied upon to tell the truth.
And these days do it quickly.
Absolutely.
Colin, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we'll talk about Southend. Machete fights going on outside Adventure Island. We'll speak to the owner of the venue in just a moment.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Now, time for the best part of the show, our Greatest Britain, where we share amazing people who do amazing things. And this week, that is Dr. Leo Cheng and the Reverend Hilary Cheng.
Well, Dr. Chen regularly serves as a volunteer surgeon aboard the Mercy ships in West Africa and has recently served his 17th mission aboard the ships. He volunteers with his wife, Reverend Hilary Cheng, a Methodist minister in the UK.
Thank you for joining us, and what a privilege. So just briefly explain, what are Mercy ships?
Well, Mercy ship provide world-class surgery on the ship, and the ship then sail to these poorest of the poor country because there's no infrastructure to get road or rail there. And we offer free surgery and also education, training of medical staff, and partner with the local or the host nation to build up their surgical and anaesthetic services.
So how long have you been travelling West Africa? You go on all these different ships, different ports, and you treat the needy and the vulnerable. How long have you both been doing this?
20 years.
20 years?
Just over 20 years.
And you take the time to do this out of your own holiday from work. Why do you do it?
Well, because I'm indebted to the education in this country with all the qualification I get. And NHS is great. I love the NHS because without NHS, we see cases that we see in the low-income country. And I want to make use of my hand to help those people who have no way of helping themselves, because the tumours, the deformities, not just a physical ailment, but it's being ostracised and die early, commit suicide because they've been ostracised by their family.
When you're on the ship, you are seeing the very worst that the country can offer. I find it a great privilege to work alongside these people.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And after watching all that was going on, the horrendous scenes happening on the streets of Southport, suddenly I get told there's a machete fight going on in Southend. Just the most extraordinary scenes. And they were happening in the street outside Southend's famous Adventure Island. Well, I'm joined by the owner of the venue, Philip Miller, MBE. Philip, what on earth happened last night?
Well, it was certainly an interesting day, Nigel. Nice to see you again, by the way. Congratulations on winning your seat. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose what happened, every now and again when the weather peaks to over 28 degrees, we get these groups from London descend on us. Normally just come for a good time. They want to play their music and enjoy themselves. But in amongst them, you've got these a few odd ones that want to cause the trouble. But I would say they came down, and it certainly didn't look very nice with these boys running up and down with these knives, but they were, quite more the rarity than the norm amongst them. Most of them are just very happy people, just playing around. And just got this minority that spoils it for everybody else. But the police were on them. The police did a great job. We had helicopters and gun squads, all these people running around for them. And I suppose at the end of the day, they were doing it to each other and not to our customers. We didn't have one spot of problem in the Adventure Island. They were all good as gold. In fact, we just didn't let them in.
No, well, that's very sensible. The point I was making, Philip, is, you can go back 50, 60 years, mods and rockers going to the seaside on a bank holiday Monday having a punch-up. But, these people are there with great big machetes. I mean, have you ever seen anything like it in Southend?
No, I'm born and bred here, and I've worked on the seafront all my life. No, that's the first time I've seen that, I must say. But when you actually watch the boys chasing each other around, they didn't do what I would call real intent. They were just sort of waving them at each other rather than anything else. I think what this does, you trace it back to London where they have these turf wars, and I think it's almost like they've had a planned duel or something, But touch wood, thank God, there was nobody was hurt. I think it's a horrible thing. It's frightening for the visitors. But Southend is a safe place. We've got the Operation Union that the police put on for us, and we're probably the safest seaside resort in the country because we've got a permanent police force on the front there. And they can, as they did last night, they just called in help the minute they saw that it was getting out of hand. They just called in the troops, and down they arrived, and that put the lid on things.
A very good thing too.
We have these guys there all the time. They're not just there for... Sorry?
No. Well, I'm pleased you're well pleased. I'm pleased you're well pleased there, Philip. Many other guests on this show say the opposite where they live. Philip Miller, thank you for joining us. Well, I'm joined by Lloyd Russell-Moyle, former Labour MP, and Aman Bogle, who runs the Global Britain Centre. Lloyd, Southport, Southend, and as Philip said, thank God nobody got killed, but pretty horrific pictures. Are we living in societal decline?
I think that probably is a bit hyperbolic to say that we're in societal decline. And I'm not sure these two things link very well. I think there are other things that are more interestingly linked. I think the riots that we've had in the last 2 weeks already, kind of in the new Labour government, we've already had seeing in Leeds and here, and also some of how people have reacted because social media has inflamed things, as you saw with the Manchester police man when he kicked that person down. Now, he was wrong in doing so, totally wrong, but once later on the real evidence came out, put it in context, I think what is a sign is that we are in a time where, the old adage, the lie travels around the world before the truth got its boots on, I think it's even more so now, and that creates...
Because of social media?
Yes, because of social media and the way that media is kind of feeds off that. Because what you see now, it's not just social media on alone. What happens is social media will do something. The traditional media then reports so-and-so's happened on social media, and it exacerbates... we exacerbate social media. I think that does create a more toxic kind of atmosphere compared to the individual outrages that we sometimes see, machetes on streets, gang warfare in Brighton. We've seen, kind of modern rockers you mentioned. We've seen that through the ages, and the modern rockers use weapons as well. It wasn't just a punch-up. They used knives and things like this. So I think that level of gang warfare has always existed, quite rightly needs to be stopped, clamped down, and it has flare-ups. What I think is more worrying is the way social media and misinformation exacerbates it and means that it's uncontrollable when it does flare up.
I wonder, I mean, Lloyd mentioned Leeds, where, bus was set on fire, goodness knows what else was going on. The police walked away.
Yes.
The police literally walked away. Now, there could be an operational reason that they needed police with a higher level of training or equipment. But I just wonder whether, I think about the marches in London, the so-called pro-Palestinian marches in London, chanting slogans for which the rest of us would probably get arrested. I wonder whether the soft approach to policing on the streets is making these kind of protests more numerous.
Well, I think, Nigel, that itself is very much a sign of societal decline, that we are seeing, this two-tier policing, this vacuum of political leadership, outsourcing of responsibility to self-appointed community leaders in so many of these places. And I would say the whole idea that you have... look, social media is here to stay, whether we like it or not. It's here to stay. Yes, we should be banning TikTok, I think. In the West, TikTok... You
think we should ban it?
Absolutely. I think... TikTok.
Nigel was very popular on it during the election.
Indeed, but TikTok, let's be honest, some of the algorithms...
Would you ban it because the Chinese own it?
Absolutely. I think the Chinese, most roads of disruption in democracy, whether in the West or I was in India for their general election, and so much of the disruption is driven by people operating out of Beijing. And that's what we're facing. Undermining of our democratic...
but equally, I hear what you say, and I do understand there are reservations about TikTok. However, I've just had to bow to the inevitable, which is that is how the under-25s in this country actually get their news and have their conversations. But, X is an American-owned platform. Facebook... American-owned platform. This isn't just China, is it?
No, of course not.
And those other platforms also can propagate all sorts of stories that aren't true.
Indeed. Elon Musk, I think, tweeted yesterday that Google was truncating searches about President Trump. So if you type in President Trump, it was coming out President Donald Duck.
But is that an argument, rather than banning a platform because you don't like who owns it, which I can understand the arguments about China, but it does seem slightly illiberal to me. Is there a better argument not that, like we do with broadcast media, there needs to be some proper regulation, there needs to be some oversight, and there needs to be some fines when these platforms, rather than just saying, oh, well, it's Jews who generated, we've got no say.
It's so hard to regulate.
I get that.
But look at Ofcom.
We put that back to the platforms and say, you need to come back to us with an argument of how you can regulate this. And if you can't present a unified system that X, TikTok, etc. have to agree, then we will come forward and regulate, and that will probably be worse for everyone. So you need to come forward with an idea. And I think the boffins in those companies will want to preserve their companies, and they will develop
that may be true. That may be true. But I'm back on this point. Whether it's weak policing, whether it's fake news being spread by whatever platform it may be on social media, I think there's a growing number of people, many, many millions, double digits millions, feeling something's going wrong in our country.
And it is. If we look at, for example, across London, half the kids carrying knives are carrying because they fear being attacked by a knife. And it's a vicious circle. I mean, look at what's happened in London. As soon as Sadiq Khan became mayor, he stopped stop and search.
Stop and search. Yep.
Right? When Boris became mayor first time around, he took off 13,000 knives in the first 3 weeks. And that made a real difference in terms of how ordinary young Londoners felt safe not to want to have to carry a knife. And if that is not a sign of societal decline, then what is?
I must say, that's a fair point. And Yvette Cooper's had a nightmare start, really, hasn't she?
Yeah, it's not been an easy.
As Home Secretary.
It's not been an easy start, but I think at the moment any government that comes in can almost blame everything on the inheritance that it has. We've seen Rachel Reeves do that very efficiently this week, and I think the Home Secretary can probably do that. But I don't notice in Brighton a huge difference in policing, some difference in community policing over the last 10 years. But I have noticed a real difference in things like youth work, in the ability of social services to intervene in problem families. And what we know, and my background is youth work, what we know very often is it is problem families, it is problem individuals, and if you don't have the social workers and the youth workers going in to be able to target them, what happens is, I'm afraid to say, I don't like to use this term, but a bit like a cancer, it ends up affecting whole areas and communities because people get dragged into that criminality, dragged into that kind of gang culture. And what we need to do is developing schemes to stop people being dragged in, decent youth work, and secondly, stopping families that are particularly aggressive and violent in communities being able to get footholds.
Well, I mean, I think we're going to have to get tough, aren't we?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say, Lloyd, that a big chunk of this problem boils down to the breakdown of family in our society. That itself is a sign of societal decline. Where are the fathers of these thugs out on Southend seafront with machetes? That's the question that we need to
where
answer.
are the mothers as well? We don't know where either of them are.
I'm going to draw stumps on this because in a moment I'm going to ask Lloyd to defend the fact that Rachel Reeves went round the country all through the campaign saying taxes won't go up, but now says they will. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Increasingly humid overnight with a threat of thunderstorms, but it will remain largely dry across northern areas. Plenty of sunshine to come this evening and through tomorrow here. High pressure still dominating, but it is drifting away to the east, and low pressure will arrive from the south as well as from the west throughout the rest of this week. Now, across the southeast this evening, there's a risk of some heavy downpours, but overnight that risk becomes more widespread, pushing into parts of Wales, northern and central areas of England, as well as sticking around in the southeast as well. And it's going to be a humid night for many areas. Drier and slightly fresher across eastern areas of Scotland, however. Now into tomorrow morning, there's a chance of some very heavy downpours. There's a warning in force for much of Thursday for a large proportion of England and Wales. That could affect anywhere east of Wales, really, across much of England. And that risk brings a potential for some travel disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland, though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales, though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts. It's going to be another humid day, temperatures in the mid to high 20s once again. On Friday, it looks fairly dry to start the day. There's a risk of some further downpours across eastern areas into the afternoon. But looking further west, there is a change on the way. A weather front wrapped around an area of low pressure will bring fresher, wetter and windier weather as we head into the weekend. So showery weather, particularly across northwestern areas, a little bit drier and brighter across the south and east.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We will not put up income tax, we will not put up VAT, we will not put up corporation tax on businesses. It was all very clear during the election, but then, in the House of Commons 2 days ago, we have found a £20 billion black hole. The Conservatives have hidden the truth from you when, well, hardly any surprise when Rachel Reeves said this earlier on today.
Look, I think that we will have to increase taxes in the budget. We will have a budget on the 30th of October, and ahead of that budget we will have a forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility, on this occasion based on accurate numbers.
Are you ruling any of those out now, as we speak?
I'm not going to write a budget or start to write a budget.
Well, Lloyd, you know, I mean, come on. I mean, we all know that parties do break manifesto promises, and sometimes there's a reason for that. The circumstances genuinely change. This is pretty dishonest stuff, isn't it?
Well, I think the argument is the circumstances are worse than even...
Oh, you don't believe that. You're smiling. You don't even believe it yourself, do you?
But I think also what we need to be clear about is in the manifesto, the pledge was no income tax, no national insurance, no VAT. Now, anyone that knows anything about politics knows that if a politician is qualifying what they're saying, it means that everything else is on the table. And I'm afraid the British public aren't so stupid to think that if you promise no raises in those three, you're also promising something else. In fact, the Tories raised this in the election campaign, if you remember, where they tried to get us, to the Labour Party, to pledge that they wouldn't increase council tax. And the Labour Party declined that pledge, said, look, we have no plans to, but we're not going to rule it off the table. So I actually think the election campaign was pretty honest about it. What's happening now is the scale that we're going to have to potentially increase taxes or make savings is much larger than anyone was told.
And how does that square? How does that square with the growth agenda? Because we kept being told there was a growth agenda. I never saw once in the campaign any evidence, apart from building a few houses, of any real plan for growth. Seems to me so much of what she's doing, and it may be necessary, may well be, I don't know. But how do you do that and get growth?
Well, it depends. Each sector needs its own area. There are some areas in the city, for example, where you can change the regulations to deviate, in fact, from some of the EU regulations that don't allow combining of advice and investment services together, which actually makes investments worse and not better, because you can't. You've actually lost huge numbers of researchers in investment in the city.
Well, I'm delighted to hear you making Eurosceptic arguments. I really am.
And I'm a pro-European. There are some advantages there that the previous government completely failed to do, that you could do, that will get certain areas of growth. You've got the house building growth, and you've got some areas around trying to make sure that you get better consumer growth in the economy as well. And I think a number of those things will be done. But I do think it's very worrying if you're not going to invest in some of the building programmes, and that's what we will need to see.
I'd love to see a Labour government deregulating financial markets. In fact, my last topic tonight is financial markets on this show. I mean, you know, as a Conservative supporting type, you can't really condemn them because you put taxes up to the highest level in 70 years.
Well, I never campaigned for any of that. To be honest, I've been campaigning to reduce taxes. But the point here is, with this government, is that, again, this is a sign of political decline. The quality of leadership that this country has on offer from, well, the two main parties, until recently the Conservative Party, the mess that we made of it, and now the Labour Party, is quite simple, that they've got £10 billion pounds worth of foreign aid budget for addressing so-called climate change in developing economies, but want to raid Britain's pensioners and still raise taxes.
How are they raiding British pensioners?
Let's stick on that. Explain.
Well, it's quite simple. Labour has very clearly announced that they want to take away the winter fuel allowance.
Yep.
When Rachel Reeves, back in 2017, was campaigning against doing that.
And the cap on what you may have to spend on care in your old age,
indeed,
is being abolished. I mean, for retired people, this is a very... Have Labour decided, do you know what? The over 65s won't vote for us anyway. To hell with them.
No, I think they've realised that many over 65s that I speak to say, I don't need the winter fuel allowance. I am well enough off. It is ridiculous. I use it to buy a new pair of, shoes or a holiday every year or something. And it seems wrong that people aren't making the cuts. I think other parts of society have made huge cuts in the past. We've seen welfare cuts, but no cuts to pension because it's been uplifted. We've seen, and we know that pensioners now in this country are better off than they ever have been, comparable to working people.
Of the 10 million.
I think people are saying, actually, there hasn't been any cuts there. But for those that are wealthy and well enough, you will need to now contribute.
Of the 10 million that will lose this, there might be a couple of million who genuinely don't need it.
Yeah.
They're very comfortably off. They've got big final salary pensions or savings or whatever it may be. But this comes at a time when gas prices are markedly higher than they were a couple of years ago.
And are likely still to stay higher.
And who knows what bigger, and particularly as we're not going to produce our own gas under a Labour government, seems to be quite brutal, actually, right now.
It is brutal because the threshold that a pensioner would lose the winter fuel payment allowance, I think, is around £16,000 of savings. £16,000 of savings is not someone who is a rich pensioner. But putting that aside even, the fact that this was a shadow government in waiting, let's be honest, this whole shadow cabinet was paid extra money by Parliament and by, as His Majesty's official opposition to know what the books were. And if now they're turning around saying, well, you know what...
Even Lloyd doesn't believe that nonsense. I mean, I'll leave a final thought on this debate between you guys to you, Lloyd. I mean, it's been a long 14-year wait for Labour to get back into government. It feels so different to 97. The optimism, the honeymoon period. Now, circumstances are different. There are a much deeper set of problems than Labour faced back in 97. Seems to me they're going to be in the trenches quite soon, fighting for their political reputation.
Well, this is, bizarrely, the most unpopular landslide in history.
Yeah.
But that, I think, actually could be to their advantage. Expectations are so low in the country about what politicians and politics can achieve. And I think if you look at what's in the King's speech and what some of the policy proposals that they are going to bring forward, I think they really do start to change the dial on renting, change the dial on how we look at certain bits of education, change the dial on how we look at transport. And if you can get some of the little things that irritate people, bins, parking, roads, etc. If you can, councils, if you can get some of that sorted, actually, I think a lot of people will say, we didn't have high expectations for you. You've managed to sort some of those basics out. We're actually now trusting you even more.
Well,
and so I think there is a pathway here that they could buck every
blob is still in charge, Lloyd. Let's be honest.
I never believed in the blob anyway.
A third of the vote, 2/3 of the seats. We'll have that debate another time. Lloyd, Alan, thank you for coming in and joining me this evening. In a moment, well, we've got a very prominent Labour peer shouting that finance watchdogs have become puppies and lapdogs of the industry. And how many times have I told you that the banks and the pensions industry don't act in your interest, they act in their own? But is there literally anything that can be done about it?
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Should Prince Harry have accepted an award named after a US war hero at a glitzy ceremony last night? People begged him not to, but he did it anyway. It's time for tonight's head-to-head. Well, Prince Harry paid tribute to the eternal bond between mother and son as he appeared alongside his wife, Meghan Markle, at the glitzy ESPY Awards, dubbed the Sporting Oscars last night. The Duke accepted the Pat Tillman Award, named after a US war hero, for his Invictus Games work. But Harry's decision to accept the award was shrouded in controversy after more than 76,000 people signed a petition demanding he reverse his decision. Well, speaking last night, Harry paid tribute to Pat Tillman's mother, Mary. But that comes after Mary Tillman slammed his decision to give Prince Harry the gong, saying, "I am shocked as to why they would select such a controversial and divisive individual to receive the award. There are recipients that are far more fitting. These individuals do not have the money, resources, connections or privilege that Prince Harry has." So tonight I'm asking, should Harry have actually accepted the award? Let me know your thoughts. Go to gbnews.com/your say. Tweet me at GBNews and make sure you take part in our poll. But going head-to-head on this now, a former royal butler, Grant Harold, and the journalist and broadcaster, Laurie Turner. Thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Laurie, I will start with you. I mean, the mother didn't want Harry to have it, but he did it anyway. What do you think?
I just think it's incredibly tone deaf. He seems to have an amazing ability to not read the room. It wasn't like this was a surprise because the opposition to him getting this award had been growing. So he had the chance to say, actually, I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to accept the award, but he didn't.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, prominent Labour peer and accountant by profession, Lord Seeker, has hit out viciously at the financial services industry's watchdogs, which is really, really interesting, saying they are puppies and lapdogs of the industry. And I have to say, Lord Seeker, I think you are absolutely right. I found the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, there, of course, to protect you, but frankly doesn't seem to give a damn about you. From what I can see, it's there to suit the industry. And I feel right through banking, and especially through the pensions industry, they're literally there to get their annual fees on your money, which over 25, 30 years compound at about a third of the money you actually put in. I think regulation has completely and utterly failed. Who has been protected since rafts of financial services regulation came in the late 1980s? Well, frankly, from what I can see, nobody. Well, perhaps somebody who will fight a different corner is the former Deputy CEO of Nationwide, Daniel Hodson, who joins me from Norfolk. Daniel, of course, there is some personal animus in this, having been debanked as publicly and viciously as I was. But Lord Seeker has a point, doesn't he?
Well, I hate to be in a position of defending regulators, Nigel, so I am going to take a slightly different position here. I think Lord Seeker is correct in some respects, but he's not correct in that, you know, this original phrase was about attacking the suggestion that regulators these days are much more market-related than they should be, much more market-aware. Well, frankly, I'm sure you'd agree that if that ought to be a change, that should be one of them. They should be more sensitive to market affairs. But I think that the real problem, and you referred to it or alluded to it, is that our regulators probably aren't as clever in the markets as they might be. We've now discovered, haven't we, that something like 2/3 of the problem associated with Liz Truss's famous budget was due to the Bank of England's incompetence. They simply didn't understand the market they were in. And now you and I operated in different ways. I was chief executive of Life. You were a commodity trader. I was a regulator. I regulated that market. It was a self-regulatory organization. And we never had any problems. We had people who got parking fines, that sort of thing, but we never had any major problems. But what we did have was a department of several people whose job was to educate the regulator, to actually make sure the regulator understood what was going on. I think the Bank of England has declined in that respect. When I was chief executive of Life, I used to go and spend at least an hour a month, probably 2 hours, with the director of markets, talking about the market, talking about what was going on in the market. And the Bank of England was very, very sensitive to that in a way that I just don't believe is passed on to the
No. So they've become detached, they've become living in their own ivory towers, and it's not serving consumers well. That's the real point, Daniel, isn't it?
Well, I think you're right. And of course, you had some experience of that yourself. It is difficult. And one of the problems is that it's a tendency for it to be over-prescriptive. And the balance between what you might call competitive and proportionate regulation and getting over-prescriptive, asking people, I mean, for instance, there's going to be some risk, but you don't say you can't go out of doors in case you get run over. You can't prescribe against every risk. And there is a tremendous tendency for them to do that.
Yeah.
And of course, that is part of what you were a victim of in terms of the debanking problems that you had, Nigel.
No. Daniel, we will come back to these subjects as we regularly do with you. Thank you for joining me down the line from sunny Norfolk. I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg in the studio. Jacob, what are you having a look at tonight?
Well, we're going to be talking about this extraordinary breakdown of law and order. And it's a very odd world we're in because recorded crime is going down, but the streets seem to be aflame. And what's going on? Why isn't the routine job of the state of keeping the streets orderly taking place? What's led to it? Why is this happening when actually recorded crime, burglaries and so on are declining?
Yes, I think it's societal decline. It's one of the things I talked about during the election campaign.
Indeed, I think that's right. There's communities are weaker, people are behaving in unexpected ways.
Communities are breaking down. It's awful. Jacob, have a great show. I'll be back with you tomorrow, everybody. First, the weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Increasingly humid overnight with a threat of thunderstorms, but it will remain largely dry across northern areas. Plenty of sunshine to come this evening and through tomorrow here. High pressure still dominating, but it is drifting away to the east, and low pressure will arrive from the south as well as from the west throughout the rest of this week. Now, across the southeast this evening, there's a risk of some heavy downpours, but overnight that risk becomes more widespread, pushing into parts of Wales, northern and central areas of England, as well as sticking around in the southeast as well. And it's going to be a humid night for many areas. Drier and slightly fresher across eastern areas of Scotland, however. Now into tomorrow morning, there's a chance of some very heavy downpours. There's a warning in force for much of Thursday for a large proportion of England and Wales. That could affect anywhere east of Wales, really, across much of England. And that risk brings a potential for some travel disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland, though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales, though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts.